Henry. Henry.
Morning, Mrs. Wood.
Hey, Otto.
Morning.
he looks like he's probably gone out for dinner or something.
Dr. Wood. Leslie, what's
How are
up?
you,
Doing well.
man?
I'm
You
sorry.
got two different pictures up here.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, did you see my screen now?
One of them, you look a whole lot younger, man.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's my second account. That's to control the just to make sure how it looks as a participant.
Hey, man, you want me to see if I can share my screen to you?
Sure. But hi, Leslie. I didn't know that you attended the department farewell this afternoon.
I did.
Yep. That's awesome.
Yep. It was good. We played music, man. So, hey, listen, this room doubles as my pig's Zoom hive.
Mm-hmm.
So my pig is in here. And I'm gonna, hopefully he'll stay asleep. He'll be fine.
That's fine.
Okay.
All right. So we will start at 9 or 8 p.m. in Mountain Time. I'll open the session by just give some general rules and also.
Henry, do you want me to see if I can share my screen or not?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just gonna
check it first. I already made you as a co-host here.
Okay. Basic.
What is your basic right now?
We'll see what happens.
Yeah, it's okay.
Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay. I'm gonna stop share. There you go.
All right.
Easy peasy, lemon squeezy.
See that guitar hanging out there? Your guitar is behind.
My guitar is behind us. I can move it around, but the room doesn't get any better. I can actually put up a beautiful backdrop.
Mm-hmm.
Rick Sarg loves this backdrop. This is my backdrop for the Guadalupe Mountains. Look at that.
That was exactly a year and a half ago when we did that trip.
It was almost exactly a year ago. We did the consortium meeting and you went,
Yeah, I think it's a good analog for unconventional. I mean, many people here really want to see the unconventional basin in field scale. So I recommend you guys to visit Guadalupe. It's a very, very nice. I mean, it's not as hot as Jakarta, so that would be fine for us.
As hot as Jakarta. We're working on a project. You probably talked to Hanaga, right? Simbrata?
Yeah.
So I think his project's going to be really interesting. I wanted him to do this core-based project on debris flows, mixed carbonate debris flows. So,
nice.
Off in the Permian Basin, they produce out of those debris flows. They fracture quite well. So I think that's an interesting direction for him to go.
Nice. So I think this is also a good calling for all of the Indonesian folks here who already obtained the scholarship from the government. I think Florida School of Mines is a good platform to go. We have Dr. Wood here with the active research on the outcrop study as well. So if you're interested, I'll introduce her in a few minutes. What is What is her research activities so far, and what is her portfolio so far. So yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Let me help you. Just a second.
sure.
You guys doing okay, Henry?
Yeah, we are doing fine. Jakarta right now is having, I don't want to call it lockdown. It's the term is social distancing.
Yeah, social distancing.
Yeah. I mean, that kind of stuff, you know. So it's basically, I mean, not many people in this. I mean, there's still so many people in the street, but
Yeah,
not
yeah,
as
I know.
much as the usual day.
Yeah.
The most of the offices are closed right now. I'm working from home. This is, I think, like 45th day or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
that's
thought
this.
I thought your work you were doing sounded interesting, so that's great.
Yeah. But we have to connect to to the company's computer
Yeah.
in the office, so sometimes the connection getting slower. So I mean that kind of technical problem. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you
Yeah.
said that your company was working in Chad too, and Chad is one of the few places I've come across
Mm-hmm.
lacustrine debris flow core. They actually
Mm-hmm.
have core in rift basins with these lacustrine debris flows, so it's kind of
Mm.
interesting.
That's nice. We had like I don't know, we have like 20,000 barrel oil per day production out there. I can't remember basically because
Yeah,
the operational office is in China and I can't I basically have no access to the Indonesian team and doesn't have any access to the China
yeah,
office. So yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
But yeah.
I'm gonna send you the paper that He Chin that
Mm-hmm.
we just finished in Australia.
Ah.
It turned into a really nice paper. Actually, I think I have a slide on it in here.
Mm-hmm. That
Um,
ranking platform.
yeah. I think
Uh-huh.
it's going to be published in Basin Research here in a couple of months, and
Mm-hmm.
we just finalized it this week. So it's a really interesting methodology, a really good paper for if you're working in rifts. So
Oh, nice. We also have Leslie. We also have Sebastian here and Arya, Chris Jackson
ah,
student. So
good.
Sebastian will talk about MTD, I think, next 2 weeks with Arya. So he just want to make sure how's the talk looks like.
Yeah,
And Alex, we talked with Alexei Milkov and for the next meeting. So hopefully it's a good sign for future collaboration.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
that sounds good. I'm putting a lot of classes online, I will tell you
Mm-hmm.
that, and we're putting together some certificates that, for sort of like earth sciences data, big
Mm-hmm.
data.
Mm-hmm.
And Zane Job is putting together some of these online classes for certificates of education. And
Mm-hmm.
I think those will go a long way towards distance learning and being engaged
Mm-hmm.
with people, So, yep, it'd be good. I need to get back over there. I haven't been over to Indonesia in, God, 4 or 5 years. 4 years,
You should be
3 years,
here.
4 years.
The last
Yeah.
time you went here, it was in Bali, right? If I'm not mistaken, right?
No. Last time I was over there, well, I
Ah,
shouldn't say
really?
that. Indonesia. You're right. I was in Myanmar. That's where I was. Yeah, most recently.
Mm,
It's been a while. We were trying to get over to Indonesia on holiday, but then I had a family death that kept us from going. So I
mhm.
need to get back over there and see some people.
Oh, oh yeah, I remember that. I was involved in that time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Anyways, it is 8 p.m. right now in the mountain time, and it's 9 a.m. in the Indonesian time. Let me open this right now. Leslie.
Yeah.
All right, sir and madam, ladies and gentlemen, good morning in Indonesian time, good evening in the US time, and also good afternoon, good morning if you are in Europe right now. Because we basically have participants all over the world for this talk. We have some people from Europe, we have some people from US, a lot of people from Singapore and Malaysia. We have some folks from Russia as well and Australia. So this is pretty much the United Nations of geology right now. But yeah, so we are super happy to have Dr. Lesli Wood. We were distinguished chair and professor at the Department of Geology and Geological Engineering, Colorado School of Mines. And she is also the director of Sedimentary Analysis and Database Research Program, which was my research group when I took my master's degree a year ago. So Leslie Wood is basically my professor who supervised my thesis work. So uh, I will open the session by introduce her, but let me read the title of our first ISPG webinar session: Seismic Geomorphology from the Earth ocean depths to the distant planets, a revolution in reconstruction landscape. Before I go for that, let me, yeah. So, so we pretty much will talk about the application of seismic geomorphology based on Dr. Wood's expertise, and also we will talk about some of her work in distal planets, and this in this example is Mars. I will start to introduce Dr. Leslie Wood. So Dr. Leslie Wood got her bachelor from Arkansas Tech University, and I mean she's basically from Arkansas. Is it the proper pronunciation, Arkansas, Dr. Wood?
Close enough. People call it
Oh,
Arkansas,
yes,
Arkansas.
Arkansas. Yeah. So yeah. So and she continued to her master at University of Arkansas, and she got her PhD from Colorado State University in 1982. Uh, and her professional career started from ARCO, an Amoco production company in Houston, Texas. And after that, she's, she was pretty much in Texas for 14 years, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Wood?
Way too long. Yeah.
Way
Something
too
like
long, yeah. So she was basically from research associate, research scientist, senior research scientist, and also lecturer at the Jetson School of Geoscience, UT Austin, until she finally moved to the mountain again to Golden, Colorado, and become the Weimer Chair professor at Colorado School of Mines right now. I Her research interest, as you can see from in the screens, but a special publication by the Geological Society can tell you any of her expertise here, together with Davis and Posamentier and Cartwright. She published I think the first book, the first compilation about seismic geomorphology. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. We
Yeah, in the history.
published that
Yeah,
together. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And the interesting thing is, she is also an active artist. You can check her Spotify. She has 3 albums right now, Dr. Wood.
Oh yeah. I think there's three. There's a couple of pirated albums floating around out there, but I don't pay
Mm-hmm.
attention to those.
Yeah, so if you're interested to listen to her music or her books, I mean, you have both choices. So yeah, and please check her the research group Twitter account as well. We have an active activity in the Twitter and also the research activities among worldwide. She has active ResearchGate, active Google Scholar, and also she's quite active in LinkedIn. So please make sure to follow her on. If you wanna hear more about her research, or if you are interested to join her as a student, please let her know. That will be perfect. So, and just a little bit information. Our next speaker for the next week talk is gonna be Dr. Alexei Milkov, and he will talk about from Colorado School of Mines. He will talk about the serendipity and luck in petroleum explorations. So, without further ado, let's have Dr. Wood to start her talk. So, Leslie, you have the time right now.
But I'm gonna share screen.
Yes, please.
Okay. Sure. There, are you guys good with that?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So I appreciate that, Henry. That was, feel free to break in and let me know if we run into any problems or I fall out. You don't have it here. So, yeah, I appreciate. Yeah.
Leslie, just a little bit information for those of you guys. Please mute the audio and also mute the video. We are trying to maintain the bandwidth because we have almost 500 participants in this talk, perhaps. So yeah, let's have Dr. Wood. Yeah, please, Leslie.
Okay. So I appreciate that, Henry. He knew more about me than I knew about myself, actually. So, but I appreciate all of that, Henry. Henry, as you know, he said I was his supervisor, but Henry does a lot of self-supervision. He came with me with a project, a really great project. He already had a start on, and he just seemed to tear it up from there. So I've always really enjoyed working with all my Indonesian students and students from all over the world. I've always had a lot of international students. I'll make a point of that later. What I wanted to talk with you guys about is something that's been near and dear to my heart. I did spend about 25 years in Texas, and then I moved in 2015 to Colorado School of Mines. So I've been here a little bit over 5 years, but I started my career in sort of PhD geology out here at Fort Collins at Colorado State University. And I was working with some guys there that were really geomorphologists. It was Stan Shum and Frank Etheridge, and they were geomorphologists. And so we were doing a big study at the time. You may know the guy's name, Peter Vale. He and Henry Posmentier had come out with a paper, several papers that talked about how rivers behave whenever you raise the lower base level on them. And so we decided that, well, we'd I write for some research funding, and we would test that concept in the flumes or in the physical models. And so I'll show you a picture of one of those later. But that's kind of where I got my start in being really interested in landforms and landscapes and seascapes, right? And so what I want to talk to you about today is seismic geomorphology. And I want to talk to you about seismic geomorphology, the concepts of geomorphology that have established our understanding of landscapes and how we fill and move sediments over those landscapes. So, as I said, when I started my research, I started it in a flume, and this is me in my glory. We were working in just a sandbox, and we were building deltas, and we were raising, lowering sea level on it. And I'm always attracted to this Calvin and Hobbes cartoon that says, "Look," Calvin says to Hobbes, it said, "Look, just a trickle of water running through some dirt. I'd say our afternoon just got booked." If anyone that knows and has ever looked at physical models knows what I mean. You can stand there mesmerized for hours just watching water run and trickle through sediments. And so I spent several summers doing this very clearly, very detailed work, sampling my flumes and trying to understand how these little river systems were behaving whenever I'd raise and lower a basin of water that's off to my left there. So this was a really good way to get started. And when I was working up in Colorado, there was a gentleman who was working at Exxon, and he was a younger guy, and he was a geomorphologist as well. He had gotten his degree up at Syracuse. Some of you may recognize him. This is Henry Pusmentier. And Henry's a great friend, and he looks a little bit older now. He was here a couple of years ago, when Henry was here at school, and he came and gave some lectures. Well, Henry came down to see these flumes that we were building, these physical models, because he wanted to see what we were physically modeling and what we were looking at. All he wanted to do was spend the afternoon looking at a trickle of water running through some dirt. After I graduated with my PhD, I moved to Amoco, and I took a job with Amoco. Times were difficult, not as difficult as they are now. I had hired into the Denver office in Amoco, and before I could even darken the door, they had closed the Denver office and moved everyone to Houston. So I moved down to Houston, and I got engaged with a group called the Coherency Development Team. And this was a team of researchers out of the Tulsa office of Amoco. And they were developing these new ideas in how you could image spatial architecture in seismic data. We had always just looked at vertical sections in seismic data, and they were looking at, continuity and variance and spectral decomposition and these different methods that you could do to image these different types of systems. And so that's kind of where I got my start in looking at these systems. When I decided to leave industry, after 5 years and 13 days I spent in industry, I left industry in about 97, and I moved to the University of Texas, and we formed a research group called the Quantitative Plastics Laboratory. And that research group, the first 8 or so years, we were very focused on the Southern Caribbean. We were very focused on shorelines and deltas and shallow marine systems and outcrop in the Western interior. We even did some work in Aeolian architectures, but we were really looking at and looking for really big seismic data sets where we could begin to look at the morphology and the processes of the Caribbean seafloor. Here's the island of Trinidad, and most of our data was sitting off in here. And we were interested in how the sediments built and moved around these structures. And we were looking at a really interesting architecture that were these submarine mass failures. So we began to quantify these submarine mass failures and look at their area and their run out distances. And this was where we were trying to quantify the morphology of these systems. The next few years, we moved into what I like to think is our international expansion phase, and that included Indonesia. We began to look for really amazing and large data sets to do seismic geomorphology. So over those years before I moved between 2008 to 2015, we worked in offshore Gabon, we worked in the North Sea. We had amazing data sets from Indonesia where we could begin to quantify fluvial systems. We worked off the Taranaki in New Zealand, and we worked in sediment wave fields and salt structures in Morocco. So we lived by the generosity of industry and their contribution of these amazing data sets to what would become a really classic research group in seismic geomorphology. That led to an amazing group of geoscientists. I've graduated 71 geoscientists over that time period, and they all are versed in understanding landscapes and seascapes and how sediments move in and around over them. You may recognize this guy right here. So he's sitting in the middle of with his Colorado School of Mines schoolmates. And I always emphasize to my my friends into people that you can grow an apple tree and you can pick apples, or you can grow an orchard. And so one of the things that I've tried for our research group to do is to grow an orchard of people that can go out and exponentially do research. Now that we're sitting in 2020, who would have thought that we're dealing with some of the things that we're dealing with now? But we continue to have a large body of research and a large body of really good graduate students. Everything will continue on. We will continue to engage graduate students from all over the world and researchers from all over the world, because we've had really good company support on what we do. Today, a lot of what we're doing is looking at stratigraphic architecture for reservoir connectivity, looking at, facies prediction using machine learning and things, and looking at source to sink sediment dispersals for reservoir quality. There's a multitude of different types of projects that are caught up in this, but you'll see that a lot of these projects, I'm going to talk about some of them, inform our ideas of landscapes and seascapes. So our love affair with landscapes and seascapes form the foundation on which our understanding of how sediment accumulates is built. This is an image from the Isle of Cyclops off of Greece by a Captain W.H. Smith back in the 1800s and the 1800s. And you can see that already people are fascinated with landscapes and the way they're evolving. They know, everyone loves to draw a nice landscape, right? Today, we look at areas like the Grand Canyon, and these are the landscapes upon which the future stratigraphy will be built. We'll be filling these. This is the incised valley that someone looks at in another million years, So we can look to these type of systems as analogs to understand our more ancient systems and our deeper time systems. Geomorphology has a history, or it labors under the idea of being something that's done by old white men, or maybe old Indian men. But today, geomorphology is no longer something to these guys are drinking a lot of water. I don't know what that's about. And these guys are looking at fish. And so, there's this romanticism of geomorphology, but today we do a lot of work in labs. We do a lot of quantitative work in imagery and in imaging different types of landscapes. My mentor, Stan Shum, was one of the first to build and begin to physically model things within flumes so that we can understand the link between process and form. The first 100 years of landscape mapping, we would stand up on hills and look out over these landscapes and try to get a feel for what they looked like. These are amazing landscapes this happens to be the Mississippi Delta and crevasse splays from the Mississippi Delta. We have our own deltas all over the world in Indonesia and tropical areas that have these amazing geometries. What we struggled with, we're trying to turn those beautiful images into things like this. This was the piece de resistance, or the way that we used to map geomorphology. We would have a distributary channel, DC, the red down the middle. We would have a crevasse splay, SPL at the front. We would have, overbank areas, delta plain areas, and we would use wells at as high a density as we could to come in and map facies within a specific interval and try to recreate these type of images using these type of data. Well, I was lucky to be on the verge of Amoco's newly developed technologies of coherency and variance and spectral decomposition. And I was lucky enough to be able to work with a team run by Kurt Marford and some other people, Greg Partika, who were trying to take seismic images and map them in this type of detail. So I was lucky enough to be engaged with a data set through ConocoPhillips in Indonesia. And this is one of my first bigger data sets. And you could see in this data, this is from the Bolonic and Gabus area in the West Latuna Basin. This is like a digital elevation model of what the fluvial systems looked like a million years ago in this basin. I mean, the level and the quality of seismic data meant that you could go in here and take images like this and actually quantify the fluvial nature of these basins, you know, a million years ago. Not only did that have implications for reservoirs and seal pairs within these basins, it also had implications for climate. It had implications for paleoarchaeology. I had a lot of paleoarchaeologists that looked at these images that I was publishing out of Indonesia, and they wanted to partner because they could see that this laid bare the geology or the geomorphology of ancient systems. And of course, there's no doubt that if you have systems that are living along rivers, you know where they're going to be in this image. So seismic geomorphology was really born through this. The study of landforms and by extension depositional systems using 3D seismic derived plan view images was the definition of Henry Posamentier. I had many conversations with Henry, and I kept trying to get him to move to a definition, something like this, which says that, you know, it's the analysis of landforms imaged in 3D seismic data, but for the purposes of understanding the history, processes, and fill architecture of a basin. In other words, you could do more with geomorphology than just map pretty landforms. These landforms are actually telling you something about slope, history, you know, fluvial drainage, fluvial activity, rainfall and climate, tectonics. So we launched into quite a large study in this area, you know, that focused more in seismic geomorphology of these systems. And this was around 2000 when we had these data. And that was about the time that I teamed up with Richard Davies and Henry and Joe Cartwright to write this seismic geomorphology book. After that, there were several other conferences. In 2010, I hosted and put together a conference in Houston that dealt with seismic geomorphology. SEPM and my colleagues, you know, they published a paper or a book on the application of seismic geomorphology in continental slope and basin slope systems. So there was a lot that was being done. Simultaneously, a colleague of mine at the Bureau of Economic Geology, Honglu Xing, was very engaged in something he called seismic sedimentology. Now, Honglu came at this problem from the seismic direction. He was interested in he was more of a pure geophysicist. He was interested in frequency. He was interested in being able to manipulate the wavelet so that you could map different sedimentologies. And he has been publishing on that for almost a decade or more. So quantitative seismic geomorphology is based on the premise that form denotes process, and process directs sediment types, the spatial distribution, and the architecture of a fill. You can see in the upper left this image of the Yellowstone River up in Montana. It shows you these beautiful point bars, cut banks, and things that are developing. And you can see the beautiful image in the lower left down here of the fluvial systems in Indonesia, the tertiary fluvial systems, showing the same sinuosity, showing the same cut bank, the same point bar architecture. So you can, in effect, turn this into a quantitative understanding of what is flowing through that system and how frequently it floods, how it's migrating. Over to the right is a really good example of this type of application by Steve Hubbard up in Canada, looking at the Cretaceous fluvial systems and mapping the detailed morphology of meanders and seismic data using a dense well data database to ground truth his work. This is a great thing to see because it's taken this many years now, it's 2014, 2015 at this time, this many years to get people engaged over really looking at a new way to look at seismic data. I say that, you know, there aren't that many revolutionary changes in how we look at data that really let us see new things and do new things with our data. But one of those has been, 3D seismic data, the development of 3D seismic data. Another thing has been, for me, sequence stratigraphy, the idea of being able to package sequences into by bounding surfaces and frameworks. And another one for me has been seismic geomorphology, the ability to map the geomorphology of ancient systems using seismic data. If we look at this data from Indonesia in a little bit more detail, you're going to see a series of slices that come up about 100 milliseconds, from about 100 milliseconds down, and it's going to slice up through the data. The green are wells that existed across this Balanic area. And you can see that every one of these slices at 10 milliseconds, every 4 millisecond slice in this data probably is about 10,000 years. So every one of these slices probably represents 10,000 years of amalgamated geomorphology on an image. And then you're slicing up through these images, at about 100,000 years. So you can see why this can be overwhelming when you amalgamate a very complex system in 10,000 years of time into one slice image. You really have to figure out how to sort of filter through the confusion that sits in this system. I've mastered the art of squinting, actually, to make this happen. People laugh, but it's like, it is a physical filter to sort of filter out some of the complexity that we see in some of these images. But it's beautiful. You can see very straight, big channels lying right next to smaller channels, very highly sinuous channels lying next to relatively straight channels. So this lays bare the geomorphology and the landscape. This is almost a 4D paleo landscape seascape image in the West Natuna Basin. If we take these data, which we did, and we began to look at the details of the architecture of the geomorphology of these channel systems, we can see from right to left, right being older and left being youngest on this graph, that we go through a phase of post-rift and then syn inversion and then post-inversion in this basin. And that the sinuosity shown by 1 through 4, 1 being straight and 4 being highly sinuous, actually 3 is highly sinuous, we can see that the sinuosity of these fluvial systems, it varies in a cyclic way over time if we look at a running average. And so, but the fluvial systems react fairly rapidly to change, and then they began to filter down over time. So we could see that there were temporal changes in the sinuosity in this basin. Likewise, we could see that there were changes in the orientation of these fluvial systems. This is an active hydrocarbon exploration area. And so for us to really understand this area, we need to understand the reservoir orientation. We don't want to be putting in a producer and an ejector well in the northeast and the southwest corner of an interval when they're not even going to be intersecting the reservoir of interest. So we did some work in here looking at how the orientation changes over time. And what we could see that was that early, in post-rift time, most of the reservoirs were oriented northeast, northwest to southeast across the area. As we got into syn inversion, we were beginning to invert this basin. We had a real mix of channel systems. A lot of the channel systems straightened up, got a lower sinuosity, but they mixed evenly from northwest southeast to northeast southwest in their orientation. By the time we got into post-inversion time, all the channel systems had settled into a northeast to southwest orientation. And this is a really simple but critical observation. If you're trying to produce this interval from 140 down to 2000 milliseconds, the orientation of your channel systems is going to change over time. So by taking this type of data just quantitative data we could pull off of these images, we could go in and begin to look at a probabilistic approach to reservoir characterization. We could look at and see that the post-rift versus syn-inversion versus post-inversion channel systems were very, very different in size, and that the P50 probability of channel width, for example, there's almost a 300-meter difference between channels that are evolving in the post-rift time and channels that are evolving in the post-inversion time. So once again, we can go in and begin to calculate volumetrics and begin to understand uncertainty associated with these systems, begin to put in plan well placements so that we can better intersect these different sizes of channels. And then finally, we can get down to the details of a channel system like this. This happens to be down at the base of this image, shows you a channel system. It's flowing from left to right. And you can see that there are deep spots within that channel. There are deep scours. They actually occur sort of in pairs, but they're occurring in very predictable locations. And this was very important for one of our consortium members, ExxonMobil, was asking about this because they have places where they have perched water or problems with resources being left behind in these deep scours, and they were trying to predict where those scours will be. Well, you can see very clearly that, you know, they're immediately following a bend in the channel system. These river systems tend to narrow, and narrowing increases the fluvial flow. If we just look at how the flow would move through this channel, you can see that it's bouncing off of the outer cut banks, going back in, and where it crosses over, you get a lot of tight, symmetrical channels, and you get a lot of deep scour. So this has been proven to occur. There's a relationship between the sinuosity of the river system and the actual shape of the channel fills. So if we go up from channel fills to drainages, we've been doing a lot more work recently looking at drainages landscapes and stuff. This, one of the big projects we just finished is off in the Rankin Platform, Kendrew Trough, Madeline Trend, Lewis Trough area of the Northwest Shelf of Australia. We've been looking at Mesozoic age drainages and watersheds. And we've been trying, there's several popular publications out that say you can relate the length of the longest channel to the size of the fans that it's depositing. And we wanted to know how well did those type of predictions follow through in more ancient systems. The work had been done in modern systems, in more ancient systems, and in different types of basins, such as long rift basins. So I had a very good Chinese scholar, still work with him quite closely, He Chen. And He came in and began to map these systems. This is a nice seismic line across the Kendrew Trough. You can see on the left that Rankin Platform area. There's a really big Rankin fault right down the left side of the rift. And then you fall off into the Kendrew Trough. And then you see the Madeline Trend where there's a little basement high denoted by the purple surface. And then you really fall off deeply into the Lewis Trough. And then there's another bounding fault on the farther eastern side of the basin, which isn't shown here. So you can see that you have a Rankin Platform where you're developing these drainages that are feeding these transverse fluvial systems down into the deeper part of the basin. And if we look at that Rankin Platform, this is what it looks like. If you map it out, you can see that there are several splay faults coming off of the main Rankin trend, which sort of separates the purple from the orange. And if we zoom in on one of these areas, we could actually map out and trace the watershed areas based upon the elevation differences. So we kind of came in and were able to trace out these watersheds within the Rankin Platform and then began to calculate the volume of sediment that we think would be moving along these watersheds. Looking at these watersheds that are feeding off into the transverse edge of the Rankin Platform or the trough, we can see that the Dixon, the Goodwin, the Perseus, the North Rankin, the Eaglehawk, and the Lambert are 6 different drainages that are draining off into the transverse areas of this rift basin. By calculating out, we could calculate out how much sediment was being derived from the catchment areas. And we could compare that basinward to our mapped fans. So up on the upper left-hand side, you can see that there's high amplitude pods that have been deposited out in front of these drainage areas. And those pods don't go a long ways because there's a lot of accommodation right along that fault area, but they branch off into the margins of that rift, and then they elongate erosional features that truncate the toes of these fans. And those elongate erosional features are turbidity channels. And those in the lower left, you can see a schematic of this. There are turbidity current channels that are flowing down the axis of the rift, and they toe truncate these transverse fans and redistribute their sediment into fans that are farther down the rift. This is why we can see that we have fans that are in one area of the rift, sort of the far southwestern edge of the rift, like the Lady Nora, the Perseus, and the Dixon areas, that have one trend of fan area versus catchment. And then we have another set of drainages, the North Rankin, the Eagle, and the Lambert, that have a very different look to their fan area versus catchment. They have larger fans for the same catchment. This is because the sediments are being relocated from the pink area to the yellow area. This is not dissimilar to the Gulf of Corinth up in Greece. You can see the image in the upper right-hand corner. We're working with a colleague of ours, Rob Galthorpe, who works a lot in this area. And you can see these transverse fans coming into the rift that is the Gulf of Corinth. And you can see these axial turbidity channels that are toe trimming and retransporting that sediment to other areas of the rift. So by looking at the geomorphology of this area and looking at sediment balance, mass balance, we can go in and begin calculating and understanding the nature of these types of deposits. There's a publication coming out on this year on redistributive processes and axial and transverse source to sink systems. It does really 2 things. It establishes a systematic methodology to assess sediment budgets in basins that we think is more broadly applicable worldwide. It's based upon both ancient and modern analysis. We've combined ArcGIS tools along with traditional sort of sequence stratigraphy. And then we've also looked at the interaction of transverse and axial processes that are influencing these deep water depositional features. You can see in image C, this is a really nice blended image that is produced by Keche. And you can see the Rankin drainage and the other drainages along the front of this, as well as them being axially sort of toe truncated by this axial turbidity channel. So there's a lot of opportunity to do a lot of landscape analysis in these images. Now, if we broaden out, I mentioned that the first few years of our research program, we were really focused on the Caribbean. This is a really pretty image generated by a colleague of mine, Paul Mann, that looks at, and some of you may know Paul, he's worked in a lot of basins around the world. He was my colleague for the first 8 years or so of our research program, and he has a great interest in tectonically active areas. And so we were working down in this area of Trinidad and Tobago. In addition to channel fluvial systems and drainages, we began to move off into deep water areas and look at deep water processes. In this area, the Caribbean plate there's a big white arrow in the middle of it. It's moving towards you, and it's actually subducting beneath, or I'm sorry, it's the Atlantic plate. Where it says Barbados Creationary Prism, the Atlantic plate is moving away from you and it's subducting beneath the Caribbean plate. And the thing that's caught in the middle is the little island down here on the lower, or sort of the middle left, sitting on the Atlantic shelf, that's Trinidad. And so I used to work a lot in Trinidad and Tobago and began to look at deep water mass failures in Trinidad and Tobago. So this is the study area that I want to show you next. This is, we were lucky, we've worked closely with the ministry there, and we've had really good luck both for working down there for 20 years or so, looking at these systems. You can see that the Caribbean plate is moving off to the east at about 20 millimeters a year, and it's abducting over the top of the Atlantic plate, where you're scraping off the entire Barbados Crucianary Prism. Out in the offshore area, in that southeastern corner of those plate boundaries, you get a lot of tectonic activity, and you have to contend with the Orinoco Delta. The Amacuro Shelf there is what is holding and being fed by the 8th largest delta in the world, which is the Orinoco Delta. So there's no lack of sediment coming into this system. So let's take a look at this area. I'm going to see if I can pull up a visualization. I'll probably blow us up or something. But if I do, just come back here and we'll get going again. But we were able to pull together from our generous industry partners and from the ministry. We actually pulled together over 20,000 square kilometers of seismic in this area. I'm going to show you this 10,000 square kilometers that's outboard because it really enabled us to go in and do an amazing look at the geomorphology of the seascapes that were evolving in offshore Trinidad. So let's see if this will, look at that. So there's Trinidad sitting there. There's the Orinoco Delta down to the lower left, and Venezuela. The little balls that you see are dropped in the water, really sort of electronically. They'll change color depending on their speed. So they are actually moving fairly slowly, fast, and then fairly slowly when they get caught up in the current. And then you'll see them sweep into the Gulf of Paria and then ride their way back out onto the shelf. So this is the Guianan current, and it's sweeping in and around the island of Trinidad and Tobago. There's a lot of extensional faults up on the shelf. You can see the extensional faults in here. I think you can see my pointer. And we're going to look at this set of data right out here. It's about 10,000 square kilometers, and it's set sort of off of the shelf offshore Trinidad. And we were really interested in the processes that were going on in this offshore area. So let's just look at one of these. I'm going to pull up the imbricates data set, and I'm going to pull up a little fly through that will show us what's going on here. This, I think, maybe it'll work. Let's take the seafloor off. It might not work, guys. Ah, there we go. So we'll see if it's going to work. So this is the seafloor. Let's look at the topography. I'm just going to turn that off. So you can see right now this mass failure is coming out at you. This is a mud volcano over on your far left. We're going to sweep around to the northern side of this, and you can begin to see the imbricate faults that exist in this. So there are a series of imbricate faults. As this big mass failure runs into these ridges, you get sharp imbrication of the deposit all along these ridges. Right down through the middle is a big scar or a drag scar. And I know that many of you have seen these drag scars before going down through there. But if you look at this, there's a big levied channel system that sits over the top of this. We call this healing phase deposits over the top of it. We're coming around another mud volcano here, and you can see some healing phase material here. As we come into this area of inflated mass failure material there, there's that big drag scar that's going right down the middle of it. It disappears right there, which isn't unusual. The block that was causing it probably got caught up into back up into the deposit itself. So you can see how you can really go in and map the structural architecture of this thing. And you can begin to think about how features like these buttressed mud volcanoes influence the ultimate deposit, the amount of scour, the amount of fill within this deposit. I'll just run that through one more time, get a little vertical exaggeration on it. Yeah, so we were able to utilize the growth in technology and these amazing images that were coming out to really begin to visualize and understand these type of systems. Let me figure out how to get out of here. I know how to open this. I'm not sure I know how to turn it off. So if we move back now to these areas, you can see why I was so enamored of these data sets, because to really look at seismic geomorphology, you have to have data sets that are really large so you can see these entire geomorphic features, such as these huge mass failures, right? And one of the reasons that people have been unable to map a lot of the details of mass failures is they were unable to get and cobble together these data sets, because these are such huge geomorphic phenomena that it's oftentimes difficult to get data sets to really look at these entire geomorphic phenomena. In addition to mass failures, we could go into, in ancient mass failures, we could look at these mass failures on seafloor data sets. This is a data set from offshore Morocco that we were graciously given by Vanco Energy and given the opportunity to continue to work by ONHYM in Morocco. And so we could map these slab failures, detached failures, different types of geomorphologies of these mass transport deposits by looking in the more ancient systems. Now, if we look at a seismic line going down through that system from up dip to down dip, this was the seafloor. You can see the chaotic nature of the seafloor image. Now we can see down in the stratigraphy that these big mass failures have been happening for quite a while. They've been happening over time. We've got rifts down at the basement area. Those rifts are being filled with sediment. And we've got mass failures that are happening farther up in the section, up near the upper Cretaceous. In addition to these mass failures that are happening and imaging these mass failures, we've got sediment waves, which I'll show you in a little bit. If we just focus in on this system right here, from the Jurassic rifts to the upper Cretaceous, you can see that there are these rifts that move up in the section, but then there's these prograding architectures that are downlapping in the lower Jurassic, downlapping into the Sag phase of many of these rift basins. And so we wanted to image what those Sag Phase Fans looked like. If we pulled out an image, you can see that these are very elongate fans that are very point sourced. What's interesting is there's a fan, and then you have an inner fan. Can you see the inner fan, the high amplitude blue? And then you have a very low amplitude outer fan that fringes it. But what's interesting in addition is you have some very distinct little channels and features that transfer sediments from the inner fan to the outer fan. Look at those. So you can really begin to get a sense for the details of the process. Now this is a Jurassic Age, a middle Jurassic Age fan system. So we're really reconstructing the seascape of the middle Jurassic time period. There's another fan actually that sits right over here. And you can see that high amplitude core once again. Then if we go into a younger section, that core evolves into this. So now we have a stack of fans that are compensating for one another. And this younger fan, this younger distal fan, once again, has a deep core to it, a high amplitude core, and then it has an outer fringe. So we can also image in our systems these type of seascapes. This is not that different from what I was doing in the flume many years ago, where we were building these low stand deltas or these low stand fans that were sitting out on the toe of slope of our fluvial systems. And you can really see how you have these higher amplitude fan systems with a lower amplitude fringe. If we continue to look at this really amazing data set in the Safi area, we have a lot of salt in here. The tectonics are mostly salt. But if we zoom in on this sort of upper Cretaceous chaotic interval, and I want you to look at the interval immediately below that chaotic interval, really high amplitude surface that's mapped in there. And I'm going to show you what that surface sort of looks like. So this is that surface that sits beneath that mass transport deposit. This is a piece of work that was done by my colleague, Dallas Dunlap. And Dallas and I published lots of papers on this. And this began to launch my interest in deep ocean currents. Because what this tells you is that there are Albian and post-Albian sediment waves that are moving and evolving in this deep ocean system, of this toe of slope system. And you can actually measure the orientation of those sediment waves, and you can say something about not just the contorites or not just the sediment waves, but also about the currents that deposited them. You can also tell that the currents were moving in and around salt features. So you can use the geomorphology to help you time the nature of the salt bodies. So once again, combining the geomorphology with almost tectonic geomorphology to deduce the structural history of the area. I think this may be the last example I want to show you of a carbon. This is of a carbonate system. And this is in my backyard in West Texas and New Mexico. And what this is a 40 Hertz spectral energy cube with color blended with a sweetness cube. And the interesting thing about data and what it's become is, as we evolve new ways to extract more information from our seismic data, we can image more and more things. So you can see in here that this is an image of a prograding carbonate shelf. We can see patch reefs. We can see tidally dominated inlets. This is a Permian age paleogeomorphology, or digital elevation model, if you want to call it, of what the Permian shoreline looked like. There are channels that are feeding the shelf edge. There's a clear shelf margin. And there are tidally dominated inlets that are moving sediments back and forth through this area. Here's the first shoreline. Then the shoreline progrades to here. Then the shoreline progrades to around there. And then finally, we get out to the shelf margin. This is a beautiful example of what we can do with carbonate systems. So the thing that now seems to be more empowering is, just like with anyone, I was never happy with the 360 square kilometer seismic survey. I was more interested in the 3,600 square kilometer seismic survey, such as the Atlantic and the Gabas area. The seismic surveys that we work with have gotten bigger and bigger as we've been able to manage them through improvements in computer capabilities, both storage and manipulation of these big data sets. We've been able to increase the sizes of the data sets that we look at and see larger and larger landscapes and seascapes. The birth of the mega survey has really changed the face of mapping paleo seascapes, paleo landscapes in seismic data. It's created a step change in our ability to document ancient landscapes and seascapes that characterize the Earth's surface. I call this the MEG, okay? This is a great movie if you've never seen this movie. And I'm not going to go into the details of it. Just take a look at it. And so the MEG surveys that we're talking about, a couple of good examples are here. PGS's North Sea Mega Survey, where they have 17 3D surveys that they've merged together to cover 138,000 square kilometers, total images of paleoscapes. Another one would be PGS's Barents Sea Mega Project, where they have 34 3Ds, 173 2Ds, and they're able to image massive amounts of area of these landscapes. And what they can do is pull together a vision of what the landscapes look like over gross areas that we would never be able to see in our own single seismic images of 360 square kilometers. So the image on your left shows you pretty much what the North Sea Valley looked like at the base Cretaceous when you were rifting valleys apart and you were filling them with fluvial systems. So it gives you a vision of what the regional paleogeography looked like at this time. This has enabled us to collaborate with a broad group of people, including, as I said, including paleoarchaeologists. The paleoarchaeologists love this. And the paleoarchaeologists love the Indonesian data sets because there was a conference in 2019 on North Sea paleo landscapes. And this was all about ice sheet configuration in the North Sea Basin. It was about the role of climate in triggering extreme events. This was a near modern systems study utilizing these type of really big 3D seismic surveys where you could go in and map the Holocene meandering river systems, look at the ice tunnels, look at the ice sheets, and began to define influences of paleo landscape on human migration and well-being. So there's a lot you can do with these that cross-collaborate across our disciplines for a better understanding. One of the larger MEG surveys, and I'll just end with this, is the Gulf of Mexico MEG survey. This is one that we're looking at right now and doing some research on. Let me show you this little red box in the next slide so you can compare on the left the previously available bathymetry data. And on the right is the bathymetry data that's available through this new mega survey. This survey was the sort of life work of a young man who put it together. He died very young, and he was 36. He had a brain tumor, but he was determined to finish this MEG survey. And he combined all of these industry 3D surveys together to give us a vision of the seafloor that we would have never been able to see from just the older data. You can see, compare and contrast these. Finally, as Henry mentioned, I have a great interest in the geomorphology of Mars. The one really cool thing about geomorphology and landscapes and paleo seascapes is they don't stop on the Earth. You know, I'm amazed I'm putting together a class, an online class in planetary geology. And if you look at Titan, one of the moons of Saturn, Titan has methane lakes on it. And those methane lakes have methane fluvial systems. And they have liquid methane building deltas and things around the margin of them that's just stunning. This happens to be an image of a water-laid deposit that used to be when water was running during the Noachian period on Mars. And we can go in as paleogeomorphologists, and you and I can map these type of systems and determine what the base level used to be like in these little lakes on Mars. We can determine what the fluvial systems looked like, and we can basically recreate the paleoscape of the Martian surface. So in summary, paleo landscapes are the key to our understanding of future Earth. The ocean processes, the history of occupation, dunes, deep water fans, sediment sinks, the frequency and magnitude of mass failures and the tsunamis that they generate, volcanic landscapes. We hold the keys to inform lawmakers and industry and populations of the way the landscapes around them will evolve in response to change. The image that you see on the left was part of a piece of work by a doctoral student of mine, first a master's student and then a doctoral student of mine, looking at, and it was funded by the National Science Foundation to look at the nature in which fluvial systems were evolving to potentially link the South China Sea with the Indian Ocean over time. So we hold the keys to understanding past landscapes and seascapes and really better informing lawmakers about these. We need to link landscapes and seascape evolution to the driving processes of Earth change, like climate and tectonics and sea level. The new mega surveys that are coming out enable us better to do this. We've got to figure out how to utilize these mega surveys if we really want to reconstruct paleo landscapes on a continental scale. So I have an immense appreciation. That concludes my talk, but I would be remiss if I didn't say that I have immense appreciation to many of my colleagues, Dr. Lorena Moscadelli, Chen, who's in the far lower right, Mr. John Andrews, Dallas Dunlap. Many of these people are my colleagues that I've worked with over time, and my current graduate students, as I mentioned, Henry and others like him, Hanaga Simbarata, who's with me now. The data that you've been looking at is provided by NASA, by our own government organizations, and many organizations and energy organizations around the world, the Indonesian government, industry organizations, the Australian government, a lot of our industry partners like Woodside, ConocoPhillips, ExxonMobil. We've had at least 24 members to our consortium over the 20 years that it's been in existence. This is our 20th anniversary year. What a year to have a 20th anniversary in. We currently would like to thank our current research partners and all of our past research partners. So I really appreciate the opportunity to come to you guys tonight and talk with you about something that I'm very passionate about, and hopefully encourage some of your younger people to get passionate with me and come over to School of Mines, and we could collaborate on some really great research. So thanks so much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Wood, for the amazing talk that we just had. So we have basically 5 people who wants to ask the question. So for the person who want to ask the question, just simply unmute your microphone right now and then ask directly to Dr. Wood. Please, Ninda. First one is Ninda right here.
Okay, Henry.
Oh, Ninda.
Hi, Leslie. What an impressive and insightful presentation that you deliver.
Thank you.
3 questions. First, as your presentation from this seismic geomorphology in one of your slides, that we can see a score in channel. And how about other sedimentary structure that give more detail, like ripple marks, graded bedding, and trace fossils? Can we see that from seismic geomorphology?
No. Okay. So if I understand your question right, Ninda, you're right. The interpretation of the deposit does not end with the seismic geomorphology. Seismic geomorphology is a tool to be used in a toolkit to understand. The best projects that I've done are ones where I had well data and core data that would help us go in and determine things like sediment size, look at trace fossil assemblages. I published a paper in the Gulf of Mexico on the quantitative seismic geomorphology of the Pliocene fluvial systems. And the thing that really benefited from was we could go in and measure the sinuosity on the seismic geomorphology, and then we could go to the wells and to the core data in those intervals, and we could look and see what the grain size was. So we developed there were some approaches in geomorphology that suggest that the sinuosity is closely linked to the grain size. And so we were trying to prove that premise, that coarser grained systems had a certain sinuosity and muddier systems had a certain size and sinuosity. And so that was a very powerful project because it enabled us to combine well data and core data along with seismic geomorphology to prove up a methodology. Trace fossil assemblages are, obviously that's a core-based visualization. That's a core-based observation. So I highly encourage, you know, Enri's project that he did in the Indonesian rift basins was so powerful because it included both seismic geomorphology and well data and core data, where he could really see all of those elements integrated together into an integrated interpretation.
So we can say that we have to validate from the core and then conventional core like that.
Yes. Now, my colleague, Honglu Xing, he works more in what he calls seismic sedimentology. He likes to invert the seismic data into sands and shales and things. And that works fine, you know, if you don't have anything else to go for. But one of the things that I discourage is, you know, if people have core data to give them a sense for the trace fossil assemblages, and they have well data and sedimentology or sedimentologic data to give them a sense for grain size, that what the seismic data does is it gives you information on the spatial distribution of the reservoir systems, right?
Right. Actually, I have two more questions. Yeah.
Okay, that's okay, Nida.
Yeah, okay. Second question is, as we know from seismic stratigraphy and log, we can identify systems right, such as boundary and maximum flooding surface. And can we identify that from the seismic geomorphology, Lesli?
You kind of cut out there, but I think what you're asking me, you're cut out a little bit. I think what you're asking me is, can we identify the flooding surface from the seismic geomorphology? We can identify flooding surfaces within seismic data based upon the on-lap, off-lap, top-lap, down-lap. Flooding surfaces tend to be down-lap surfaces, and we tend to see that in seismic data. One of the things that I've done several times is go through and actually map the flooding surfaces as the framework surfaces between which I'm going to image the seismic data. Those flooding surfaces become really nice boundaries that are easy and fairly fast to map, and it'll give me a framework for imaging the more complex geometries in between them. So there are criteria for defining the flooding surfaces within the seismic data. Now, where the actual faunal abundance occurs within that interval, you'd still really have to have well logs to sort of, and biostratigraphic data to determine where that faunal abundance occurs within what is a, you know, what's a fairly good sized seismic wavelet.
Okay. Oh, okay. And then third question, I want to ask about what is differences between seismic geomorphology and seismic sedimentology? Because you have there is a slideshow that you said that there is seismic geomorphology and seismic sedimentology, and I still confused about that.
I tend to think of seismic sedimentology as being more it's a term more to invert the seismic wavelet or the seismic energy and stuff into a sediment type, lithology, like a sand, a shale, things like that. For seismic geomorphology, I'm interested in landforms. So geomorphology is the study of landforms. And so seismic geomorphology is the study of landforms in seismic data. So I'm looking to map and understand landforms, and I believe there's a relationship between the form that I'm mapping and the lithology that fills it, or the lithology that it's composed of. And that's sort of the difference between seismic sedimentology, which is really looking at the frequency and the velocity and the character of the seismic wavelet to transform that into lithology. And I'm looking to map the paleo forms on seismic data.
Okay, I see. Thank you very much, Lesli.
You're welcome, Ninda.
So we will have the next question by Mas Andi Salahuddin. Please, Mas Andi.
Thank you, Mr. Henry, and also thank you, Dr. Wood, for very nice presentation. There was one slide, very interesting slide, when you saw, if I'm not mistaken, like a distribution function of the average channel width,
Yeah.
which is very interesting, very useful for in terms of the exploration side, also
Yes.
for development side, for in the modeling, in the static modeling side. My question is that as to the average channel width, how is the PDF curve looks like with regards to the channel thickness, channel sinuosity, and channel fill, whether it's sand prone versus shell prone for different tectonic phase, post reef, syn inversion, and post inversion, if there is any. That's
Yeah,
it.
and so Andy, there are that's a much that's a much larger research project that has over 700 measurements on channel systems of width, length, sinuosity, meander width, meander length, and shape of the channel systems. I'm happy to send Emery the references for that if you'd like to pull those. Of course, it's all on, I don't know, who do you work for? It's all on our consortium website. But we looked at all of those variables. We looked at how the shape of the channels were changing. We looked at how the average width, the average sinuosities. I finally decided to put them into cumulative probability curve plots because I've decided that's a much better way to look at data than sort of averages and cross plots. Like you said, it's much more meaningful for someone who's trying to determine, for instance, well spacing. I can go in and tell you that if you put in a 500-meter well spacing, you are most likely to hit this many channels or something. And so that's why we do it with cumulative probability curve plots. You're right, there are definitely differences in the sinuosity and in the shape and the length of the channel systems and in the depth of the channel systems, depending on whether you're in the post-rift, syn inversion, or post-inversion time periods of that basin. We also went down into the deeper parts of the basin and the rift part of the basin and mapped, there's a couple of papers in the Seismic Geomorphology of the rift parts of the basin that we published too. Darren Burton published those papers. So if you're interested in that type of information and data, I'm happy to send Henry a list of references that he could forward out to the group if you wanted to. Henry, is that something you could do, or?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I can share any references that you want to share.
Okay. Yeah. Why don't I do that? Let me make a note to send him references. Okay.
Yeah,
because yeah, I should be able to come up with those. I'll send those to you tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Thank
Mas
you,
Andi?
Dr. Wood. Mas Henry, if you allow me, please, just one quick clarification question. Yeah, Dr. Wood, I would like to introduce myself. I was basically working for one company in the Middle East where I'm dealing mostly with the Cretaceous carbonate reservoir, which is, that is very widespread. We are talking about hundreds of kilometers basin-wide or carbonate platform. All right, I saw one of your slides, which is very interesting, about how you distinguish distinguish between, this carbonate platform with those two from the clastic system. Now, my question is there any published paper from you or your team showing how is this reef reef dimension and orientation? Because for the modeling side, I think that's one of the main uncertainty from static modeling side, if I am not mistaken.
Andy, I had always sort of stayed away from carbonates, in part because I was working with a colleague of mine, Dr. Charlie Cairns at the University of Texas, and and they sort of had staked out carbonates as their territory, which was fine. They did a really good job with carbonates. I don't know if you can see behind me, the image that's behind me is the Guadalupe Reef system in New Mexico. And so when I moved to Colorado School of Mines, I decided that I was no longer going to run away from carbonates. I was going to begin working carbonates. And so I and Dr. Zane Job have several students that are now working carbonates. But I'm ashamed to say I don't have any personal publications on carbonate systems. We will be coming out with some work that we're doing looking at mass failures in mixed carbonate clastic systems in the next year or two. And so maybe I can come back and talk with you about some of those. I would have to guess that surely someone has done a quantitative sort of analysis of the size and shape and orientation and architecture of reef complexes around the world. I would find it hard to believe they haven't, but I've been surprised before at the lack of work that's been done. So,
well understood, Dr. Ruth. Thank you very much for your present explanation.
You bet, Andy.
All right, because we still have 5 more questions, Dr. Ruth, if you don't mind. So first of all, for all of you guys, to make sure about the identity, please introduce your name and also your affiliation or your company to make sure if the company are listed in the consortium so you can access the database. So yeah, please, Mas Sulianto.
Okay, hello, Dr. Leslie Wood. Is Julia. Yeah, I am a petrophysicist working in Pertamina Hulu Mahakam based in Balikpapan, Indonesia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, before I petrophysicist in Total.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah. So thank you for the nice and fruitful presentation. So since I'm a petrophysicist, I would like to know the reservoir property of alluvial and fluvial fan deposit. So it will be a very good porosity and permeability or not.
You know, I mean, that's a loaded question, Yulianto. I'm sure that in some cases it would be very good porosity and permeability. In some cases it would be awful. My colleague Perrette Plink Bjorklund works a lot with alluvial fan systems. And the stuff that we did in offshore Northwest Shelf Australia, those were basically alluvial or transverse fan systems that were coming into a very steep margin. And there was a lot of what I would call grain flows and a lot of high net to gross sand and material in those. They bordered on the edge of what people would call debris flows, but I would really call them grain flows. And they had very good porosity and permeability in them. Now, there are plenty of alluvial fans that have disseminated or in situ sort of interstitial clays and muds that don't make nearly as nice a reservoirs. So I haven't looked in a lot of detail at the petrophysics of different types of fan systems, but that is something that my colleague Perrette Plink Bjorklund does quite a lot of work with. And if you want to send me, surely Henry can distribute my email. If you want to send me a note, I can certainly put you in touch with her. She works with a lot of really good Indonesian students too, and some students that have done some recent work in what she calls fluvial fans, and looking at the sedimentology and architecture of these fluvial fans. So there is quite a bit of work done out there. And like I said, all the really good reservoirs within the Dampier subbasin in Australia are these sort of coarse-grained alluvial fan complexes that are feeding off in the basin. Not to mention that I know that Henry's work that he did in the Indonesia basins, he had some pretty interesting alluvial fan systems in those basins that looked really nice in core and petrophysically. So So if that's an interesting comment you make, though, if that's a reservoir that you guys are really interested in, I'd be interested in learning a little bit more about it. So.
Okay, so because you know, you just said that in alluvial fan, sometimes we can have the good porosity and permeability. Sometimes we don't have the good porosity and permeability. So according to your experience, what is the main factor to control the permeability and the porosity of the reservoir?
Source area.
Source area?
I mean, I think that, you know, the thing about the fans in the Dampier subbasin is they're reworking a bunch of Jurassic fluvial systems that have pretty good net to gross. They have pretty good sand content. And then you get some other fluvial systems, or, you know, you get some other alluvial fan systems that are reworking and hosting off of muddy source areas, and they have a lot of interstitial clays in them that occlude porosity. So one of the things I think has strongly to do with the source area of the material. The interesting thing about the stuff in Australia is it's not a matter of reworking and cleaning this stuff up. I mean, these have a very narrow shelf that they're being deposited on, and they have fairly short, stunted and narrow source drainages. So these aren't coming from like thousands of kilometers where you're reworking a bunch of mud and silt out of them and reworking them into nice reservoirs. This is strictly a matter of them coming from a source where they're sourcing a lot of sand.
Okay. So I am interested if you have any paper related to the alluvial fan deposit in terms of petrophysical properties.
Okay, so I made a couple of notes, and what I'll do is I may come back to Enri to get more contact information from you, or maybe he can give you I'm happy for him to give you my email, obviously. If you want to repose your question and send me a note to remind me, and I can see what I can come up with for you.
Okay.
I'll share your contact to everybody who are included in this.
Okay.
Dr. Wood. And also, Masyul, I can also share some of my work in alluvial fan in Jatibarang.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. He has some really good work for his master's. It was very well done.
Because you know, in Mahakam Delta, in here in Balikpapan, we are working a lot of you know, sedimentology of the Mahakam Delta. So I would like to know what is the petrophysical property of the alluvial fan deposited in you know, in the submarine.
In the submarine fans. Okay, that's a different matter, Yulianto. If you're in a submarine fan system, then and the Mahakam tends to have a lot of mud in it too. It's a fairly finer grained thing, I think. So yeah, send me a note and let's get back in touch about what you're doing.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right, to speed up the time, let's have Mas Harwi Janto for the next question.
Hi, Dr. Lesli Wood. Yeah. Okay, I'll show my face.
Oh,
sorry,
how are you?
Yeah, Harry. Yeah, I'm working as a consultant in a small company in Jakarta. And I used to work a very long time with Shell, and been working on the type of seismic geomorphology quite a lot.
Okay.
It means that so much about that one has been discussed, and I'm so thankful to have to listen your presentation. It's really great and makes me learning again. Okay, so because I'm using my mobile as a hotspot, so a little bit heavy, so I close my video. Okay. My question is more about carbonate actually, and I've seen one of your slides, especially on carbonate, and with a great kind of visualization showing different kind of bodies, patch reefs, and channels and so forth. That if you could elaborate a little bit more, especially on the properties of my focus is more on like tidally dominated inlet channel system within carbonates, because this kind of system can have light to the prospectivity of a carbonate, especially where reef is separated from the other reefs with this kind of dominated inlet, tidal inlet, and so forth. So if you could tell us more about that one, that would be great. And I think Andy previously has already talked about this one, especially in the Middle East. That is the river system as a reservoir in the Far East, like in Malaysia, Indonesia, quite a lot. And there are still, I believe, a lot of prospects or leads that that can be increased in terms of the prospectivity if we understand fully about this geomorphology and become new targets later. Thank you.
I understand. You know, and with all of that nice introduction, I wish I could tell you more about them. I do work in tidal channels some, and I do work in washover fans some, mostly clastic systems. As we've begun to work a little more with the carbonate seismic data, that data set is actually a little bit of a proprietary data set from a company out in West Texas, although nobody's drilling anything in West Texas right now. But it is one of the best I've seen to image these channel systems and stuff. I don't know if anyone has done much quantitative work looking at the distribution of channels, sort of these tidal channels that are cutting these reef complexes. I do agree, I could understand how that's a really important variable in how you want to put wells and how you want to produce these types of carbonate systems. But unfortunately, I just haven't had enough experience in working carbonate systems to be of much use to you, Harwanta. Apologies for that.
All right, I think it would be good sometime in the future to have more examples from this kind of system that is have left a lot that may be explored and or unexplored.
And so maybe I need to dig deeper into some of the older carbonate sections rather than just focusing on the clastic sections. We had some really good data in offshore Guyana, Suriname, where a lot of the discoveries recently have been made by ExxonMobil. That was a beautiful data set. We worked on it for a couple of years, and then people had too much success there, and we ended up losing the data set. So that is the nature of getting really nice data sets from industry people, is no matter what your contract says, when you give them, when they ask for them back, you give them back. So, but maybe we need to look for some better data sets in the Australian areas or something to just do some quantitative looking at channel systems, these tidal channels that are cutting reefs, and sort of begin to give people some sense for how their frequency and nature. So I'll keep that in the back of my mind.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. I think just remind me again about we have a paper actually from Jintan Field in Malaysia, and we use similar kind of visualization system to reveal different kind of facies. So that's great.
Oh, okay. Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Wood. Okay, next question, Mas Benny. Just please introduce yourself and kindly speed up the question since we have a limited time.
Okay. Hi, Leslie. I'm Benny. I'm working as a geophysicist for PTTEP in Bangkok office in the headquarters of the PTTEP.
Okay. Good.
Thank you very much for your sharing, and it's very good presentation and also very good data set. And I'm very lucky actually because I can relate directly your data set to my current working, because I'm working supporting new ventures and also the exploration assets around the world. So actually my question is related to the sediment webs. What I see, the sediment webs, I think you show me, you show us from the data in Morocco.
Yeah.
That, okay, that running from southwest to the northeast. How the sediment webs distribute actually, redistribute the sediments that coming from the shelf. Because what I see, there is two types, at least two types that I can remember. One in the MSGBC basin in the Africa, and one in the Mexico. Both of them, they have a different result. One is kind of like just redistributing the sand, and then that's why you make like a sediment wave that you show me in Morocco. But another thing in Mexico is kind of like what is called destroy the pattern of the sand, so it's becoming like a fingering. I think more like a contourite, I think. So it's kind of like you get like a muddy because the sand is because the what is called the along slope current is like a perpendicular to the sediment direction. So it's destroy and then like redistribute the sediments. But the other way, it can make like the one that I see in Morocco. So what is the process, or how is that, because of the strong current or not? And another thing I see also in the Gulf of Mexico survey, I see there is like a channel system that along, perpendicular to the shelf direction. What I can remember, we also have the strong paleo current right around that, and then why we still have the channel system over there. Kind of a channel, but it's kind of a perpendicular to the shelf. Thank you.
Okay, Benny, let me unpack this just a bit.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, a lot of questions.
So, maybe I should come over and spend a week with you. I think there's a paper in the Gulf of Mexico fairly recently by a friend of mine named John Snedden, and they talk about sediment waves in the Gulf of Mexico. There's quite a lot of work that's done in that stuff. There's one of my graduate students named Maria Prieto published a dissertation on sediment waves in the sort of salt and toe of salt province in the Gulf of Mexico. We are working extensively in deep ocean sediment waves. One of the first things that Maria did was she proved to people that all sediment waves were not muddy. Over at least 25% of the ones that have been mapped through the ocean drilling program are fine sand or coarser. So it just depends on the source of sand and the source of sediment. A lot of people have proposed to, for instance, in the Guyana-Suriname area, it's been proposed that many of the deep water fans that are being drilled are sort of hyperpycnal flow sediment waves, right? They're coming from turbidites that are moving down slope, and they're transforming into supercritical flow. And then when they hit the bottom of the slope, the flow transitions back to subcritical, and you get a series of sediment waves that pile up at the toe of slope. So that's one type of sediment wave. The other type, there's other types of sediment waves, like the offshore Morocco waves, I believe are being deposited by currents that are moving along the toe of slope, as opposed to anything that's coming down the slope. There are some sediment waves in Senegal that I believe are probably being formed by these systems moving off the from the top set to the foreset to the toe set. The ones in Morocco, I think, are being moved more along slope by deep ocean currents within the proto-rift or the post-rift basin. The thing is, yeah, in order to get sandy material, you're going to have a sandy source for that material. Right now, we're trying to we're doing quite a lot predicting the location of sediment wave fields. I call them sediment waves because one, the term contorites has a negative connotation in industry. Everyone hates them because everyone thinks they're muddy. So, and all sediment waves do not follow the contours of the ocean. So I call them sediment wave fields because that's really what they are. They're a field of sediment waves. So there are different types of sediment waves and there are different processes. You're right. I can tell you've been reading about them because you're aware that there are some that are being deposited, perpendicular to the slope and some that are being deposited parallel to the slope. So I should send you, I could send you a copy of Maria Prieto's dissertation. And I can't send you a copy of the work that we're currently doing with sediment waves, just, because it's proprietary to the consortium right now until we publish papers. But suffice to say, the one thing I tell people about these sediment wave fields is they may only be, I don't know, 5 meters to 10 meters thick. But if you have very low amplitude structures off in deep water or something, then they will extend for, hundreds of square kilometers with a very consistent grain size and a very consistent petrography for hundreds of square kilometers in the subsurface. So, they are a very consistent and continuous reservoir. So that's the short answer. But I could do an entire sort of, it'd be good to do an entire lecture on sediment wave fields or I call them deep ocean continuous current deposits. So they're continuous current deposits. They're being deposited by continuous current as opposed to turbidites, which are being deposited by ignitive or non-continuous currents off the shelf edge. So
yeah,
that's.
So maybe next sharing session, can we discuss about that?
that would be, we could do a whole talk on continuous current deposits, or I could come and do a short course on continuous current deposits probably. So
sure. I can propose to my boss first.
Yeah, we've done a lot on continuous wave fields and continuous current deposits. They're really interesting systems. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Lesli. Yeah.
You bet, Vinny.
I will please share me the one that you mentioned about the dissertation and also some of the paper.
Yeah, send me an email and I'll attach to you. We transfer you Maria Prieto's dissertation or something. It's a good start.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Lesli.
Okay.
Thank you, Henry.
Okay.
Sure, Mas Denny. I send you some private message about the Dr. Wood email address. So yeah,
okay,
we are moving to the next question from our alumni, Dr. Wood, Mr. Frank Boche, which was graduated from Geophysics Department in Mainz, if I'm not mistaken. Monggo, Mas Frank.
Yes, let me show you my face also.
Frank.
Yeah.
Frank. Okay.
I was a regular visitor of course lab back there. Well, only on Friday evening.
Okay. I'm losing it.
Putus-putus nih, Mas Frank.
Frank, you're gonna have to turn off your video. See if we can get better audio stream.
Mas Frank, mungkin kita matiin aja videonya biar koneksinya bagus, Mas.
Okay. Okay. I turn off my. Is it better?
It might be better.
Yeah, better.
Hello. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Pak Henry and Dr. Wood. This is a very good opportunity. I saw a presentation of the author of book that I really enjoy sharing with people. I also learned a lot from the book. I have question, but the question is like, it's good that now we can see the geomorphology from the source of the sediment, so the provenance even all the way to the upper fan in deep water. Now, my question is about statistics. Have you seen or have you done any statistics like in like roundness or sorting for this? So I'm thinking I'm trying to make one like this from the field that I've done before. So it's like I starting to sort it out, like this is not from delta, this is slope failure, so it's different. So it depends on the slope. But I would like to know, because there's a lot of times, especially right now, where maybe it's different now, but we got a lot of 3D and there's no well. But we know there is very good feature, but we don't know whether this is
yeah. I understand what you're asking, Frank.
And also
yeah, I understand what you're asking, Frank. And part of the idea of using areas where we have wells is to convince ourselves that the morphological size and shape and character has a strong relationship to the petrography or the sedimentology of the system. I can do that in channel systems, but I haven't been able yet to get enough submarine fan penetrations to really do that with fan systems. The stuff that we had in offshore Dampier subbasin, that had only about one well through the fan systems. The other wells were through other types of depositional systems. But yeah, that more of that needs to be done, sort of tying the shape and the morphology that we see in the seismic geomorphology to the sedimentology. Like I said, I've done a lot of that in channel systems, but it hasn't been done a whole lot in fan systems. There are a few papers around that tie the shape, the thickness versus the lateral extent and stuff to differences in sedimentology, but not a lot's around. So if you can do something and add to the body of literature, that would be very useful.
Yeah, actually, I'm looking for it because I recently work on. I just finished it, working on somewhere to the south of Gulf of Mexico, and there's no well, and everybody argue with me around this is they call it, this is mass transport complex. This is not Turbidity, which is have good porosity and everything. So it will be very helpful if I can have statistics. Somebody have done it, but at the same time, I'm going to contribute also some of the data. If I
well, are you dealing with the clastic section, or are you dealing with the carbonate section, like down in the Golden Lane and down in the Cretaceous carbonate section with these deposits?
Sounds like you know where I'm working on. No, I mean the classics.
You're in the classic section. Okay, so one of the problems that I run into in the Gulf of Mexico, the southern Gulf of Mexico, is I actually teach just a sort of a one-day summary course, and we step down through the southern Gulf of Mexico and look at all the fields and everything, down through Veracruz, down through Macuspana, down through, you know, all the stuff. And there's just not a lot of well penetrations that are publicly available off there. So you may have access to some more proprietary data that the PIMX has released that would let you do some of that. It's just tough to get data non-proprietary. Well, it's a little easier now that people are all working down there, but prior to me working down there, when I was working down there, it was just very difficult to get a lot of well penetrations down in those areas. There is a paper around the Golden Lane area by a colleague of mine, a former colleague of mine, I guess, he's still a colleague of mine, Xavier Jensen at the Bureau of Economic Geology, where he looks at some of the debris flows, the mixed carbonate clastic debris flows coming off of the Golden Lane structure. And he has some porosity and permeability information on those deposits. So if you're interested in that, I can, I mean, I'm happy to send you the references. Just send me a note and remind me of what you're interested in, and I can sort of sit down and see if I can find it on my disk and send to you, okay?
That will be good. I'll send my email to Henry. And actually, I'm working to the east of what you just island.
Yeah, I've been there.
Okay.
I worked all that stuff off to the east.
Oh, it's very good.
Especially
the ratio.
Yeah, I've worked all that stuff off to the east, all the way out into the Mexican ridges and farther out. So I'm familiar with what you.
I mean the west. I was in the west. Sorry. I was the east is just I'm still working on the one east, but the one I mentioned was the long distance flow of sediment is the small island in the west.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah. Send me a note, Frank, and we can follow up.
Okay. Thank you. I'm taking note about the ratio that you mentioned. I'm going to use it also.
Okay.
All right, Doctor, we have the last two questions.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. Mas Dian, please introduce yourself and also your affiliation, Mas Dian. Thank you.
Okay. Hi all, everybody. My name is Dian Kurniawan. I'm from IANA Indonesia. I'm a reservoir geologist. I would like to thanks to Dr. Wood. It was really nice presentation, and also thanks to ISPG who arranged the interesting talk this morning. So my first question is about the perch water phenomena. If I'm not mistaken, in one of your slides, you presented about this perch water phenomena in the deep water, if I'm not mistaken. But actually, I'm working on the deep water environment now, and it's really interesting. Phenomena in the deep water because it's related to the well placement, the strategy of the well placement. And based on your slide, if I'm not mistaken, you show us the soaring process that related to the perch water phenomena. And since there is no scale in the picture, if you don't mind, you can explain to us how big the dimension of the soaring system, soaring process that can have the perch water phenomena, especially in the deep water environment. And this is really interesting with this because this is one of the risks in the well placement process in the deep water environment. And then okay. And then I have one more question, and the second question is related to the one of your study, if I'm not mistaken. Your research study is about the stratigraphy architecture for the reservoir connectivity, and this is also a really interesting topic. And I have a question related to the how to quantify the connectivity actually between the depositional elements, especially in my cases is in the deep water environment. So if you can share to us the way to quantify the connectivity between the water, the depositional elements, it will be beneficial from me especially. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, let's unpack that. So the channel that I think where I was talking about perched or perched water or left resources and stuff was in the fluvial channel systems. Those would have been subaerial fluvial channel systems where we had very, very deep scours in the base of the system. And that's kind of what I was talking about. Now, you will get the same thing in deep water systems. Those channels are, you know, the P50 for channel widths in the post inversion system, I guess the younger system, is about 560 meters. So these are quite large channel systems, or can be quite large channel systems. And about, you know, and as you go bound into the post rift or to the syn rift systems, the P50 is 430 meters, the P50 is 300 meters. So they get smaller as you get older. But I use that probabilistic approach where I can go through and measure the width and the thickness of all of those channel systems, and then I put them on probabilistic sort of probability curve, and I can use that to predict connectivity between different wells. In other words, if I have a P50 where my channel system is 300 meters wide, then I know that, you know, I wouldn't want to go in and start spacing my wells at 1,000 meters, you know, each. There's going to be a whole lot of channels in between there that I'm not going to connect, right? So I use that, like I'll collect the quantitative data, and then I'll put it into cumulative probability curve plots, and I can use those to say, okay, if I have a well spacing of 1,000 meters, what's the probability that I'm going to hit, that I'm going to connect 50% of my reservoirs, right, within that system? So there's a way to use that data and sort of determine connectivity between your channel systems. And you can do the same thing in deep water channel systems too. And your fan lobes, actually in deep water systems, dealing with your connectivity between fan lobes is actually an important thing. And so you'd want to know what's the P50 of the maximum width of my fan lobes, and what's the probability that they will overlap each other, right? So, so this is one of the ways to use your seismic geomorphology and sort of systematically collect quantitative data and see, you know, what's the spatial distribution of your data. But the one example that I was sort of calling on was the one in Indonesia, where those were fluvial channels, and we were trying to determine the P50 of the width of fluvial channels within fields that were located within post-rift systems, fields that were located within post-inversion systems, and fields that were located within syn-inversion reservoir systems. And the P50 of the post-rift system, which is the one that I was showing, the P50 of those channels was about 500, between 500 and 600 meters. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes. Thank you. Because sometimes the seismic resolution cannot detect the dimension of this phenomena. And once we drill the well, and then suddenly we found water, and we surprised because based on the base of the reservoir, it seemed flat. But if you look at the sedimentological process in here, the shoring system can make the irregular surface that can create the perch water phenomena. And this is the one of the risks in the deep water environments when we drill the development wells. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really need to look at more data with you guys and us talk about that, because we're finding, you know, we're doing some work in the consortium right now where we're doing some real deterministic mapping of channel systems through structurally complex areas in offshore Colombia. And, you know, we're finding that the base of the channel systems are very irregular. And so, you know, they can change up to 10 meters depending on, you know, these scour and fill of these systems. And so that can also affect the results of what you do. So it really just, yeah, we need to do some more work on them, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Dion.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Dr. Wood.
Mas Dian. Okay,
Welcome.
the very last question, Dr. Wood, from my ex-colleague in Chevron, Mas Iqbal, which is the stratigrapher from Chevron.
Okay,
And
thank you, Henry.
And Iqbal is the flume expert in Indonesia.
Is that
Flume
right?
expert.
This question. Thank you, Henry and Dr. Leslie Wood. This is very nice talking this morning. I think this is very important to us. I'm now working for Chevron. Actually, Henry is my colleague during he was in Chevron talking about many things when we are doing working in Singkarak Lake and Ambil Basin in West Sumatra. And in this occasion, I would like to know about talking about the seismic geomorphology, mostly related to the paleo landscape. However, you are dealing with modern landscape as well, right? I think you also have many data sets around the world. I just want to know, as long as your career in seismic geomorphology, how much different if you compare and quantify between ancient landscape and modern landscape in terms of scale, characteristic, and same tectonic setting? I just want to know that.
My standard comment for that, Iqbal, is always that the present is the key to the past.
Right.
Somewhere. Okay.
Somewhere.
So I can go and look at. There's some principles in geomorphology. It's called the location for time substitution. For instance, I can go and look at a delta at one location and map it, and then I can move along the shoreline and map another delta. And the first delta may be in an early phase of evolution, and the second delta may be in a later phase of evolution. In that case, I can look at the modern systems, and it's called location for time substitution. I can look at different timing of different evolution of deltas in different locations. I always say that looking at modern systems is useful, because although it may not be a good example of its own self in the ancient past, it is a good example of something in the ancient past. So the more analogs that we can look at in modern systems, and let me tell you, Google Earth has revolutionized our ability to look at landscapes and stuff, right? Hasn't it? And the more we can look at ancient modern systems, the more we can build a catalog of understanding to use as analogs for ancient systems.
Perfect.
Well, I should end on a perfect note then. So,
it has been his question for a long time, Dr. Leslie.
People have always been doing that. I will tell you right now that some of you may know John Van Wagner. John Van Wagner used to tell me all the time that that you couldn't use modern systems as analogs for ancient systems. It just wasn't working. Well, John was working in the Western Interior Cretaceous Seaway, you know, so maybe the analogs of the passive margin of the Gulf of Mexico were not necessarily the best analogs for the Western Cretaceous Interior Seaway, but the analogs of the Gulf of Mexico were good analogs for something. I'll tell you that.
Is it possible if the tectonic setting itself in certain location and certain region will control the architecture itself or the sedimentary architecture itself?
It's definitely possible. Definitely.
So that's why
that's just like if you do flume models, well, if you do physical models, you know the same thing I get into, which is people telling us that the physical models, you know, have too many scaling problems. They're not good representation of modern systems and ancient systems. Well, that's true if you try to use them as scale models of ancient systems. But if you try to use them as quantitative or qualitative models to understand the processes that are going on across a large system, they're very good analogs.
Yeah, I tried first film model for Mahakam Delta. I think I published in IPA in 2013. That's a very good analog to identify the reservoir characteristic in terms of place of the petroleum system itself. I think, yeah, that's very.
Yeah, we'll have to
nice,
visit on this some more. Whenever I can come visit to Indonesia, we'll have to visit on this some more.
Yeah, because rarely in Indonesia run a FLAM model, Doctor.
Good. Okay. Are we good, Henry?
Yeah, I think we are good right now. Thank you so much, Dr. Wood.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it, you guys. It's been really nice talking with you. Glad to spend your morning with you. Go out and have a great day, okay?
All right. Thank you very much. I hope you're doing safe up there in Colorado. And for all of us, happy Ramadan and happy fasting.
Happy Ramadan.
Just make sure you're doing safely right now during this COVID outbreak. So see you in the next ISPG webinar talk. And thank you so much again for Dr. Lesli Wood. And
thanks for setting it up, Henry. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Leslie. Bye. Thanks, Pak Henry, as moderator and all participants.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. Bye.
Thanks a lot. We'll see you later.
To all participants, please send us feedback through the link that given by moderator in the link chatting. Thank you.
Okay, Mr.
Terima kasih teman-teman yang sudah stay di akun YouTube juga. Kita akan coba untuk perbaiki lebih baik lagi ke depannya. Terima kasih.